The first person who noticed the dog wasn't acting normal was a 7-year-old girl named Emma Parker. And if Emma had ignored him that afternoon, the way everyone else did, she never would have discovered what had been buried beneath the old storm shelter for nearly 30 years. But at the time, nobody was thinking about buried secrets. Nobody was thinking about mysteries. The entire town of Red Creek, Oklahoma, was thinking about one thing: the tornado warning. Dark clouds rolled across the prairie like a wall of smoke. Weather sirens echoed through town. Local radio stations interrupted their programming. People left grocery stores. Farmers rushed to secure equipment. Parents called children inside. It was the kind of afternoon every Oklahoma family recognized immediately. The kind that made your stomach tighten. The kind that made people glance at the sky every few seconds. Emma Parker stood in her grandmother's front yard holding a stuffed rabbit while the wind tugged at her. Blonde hair, she was supposed to be helping her grandmother carry supplies into the old underground storm shelter behind the house. Instead, she was staring at a dog, a massive black German shepherd named Ranger. Ranger wasn't an ordinary dog. For 8 years, he had served alongside military handlers overseas. Explosive detection, search operations, disaster response. By the time he retired, he had saved lives most people would never know about. Then he came home, or at least as close to home as he could. A retired Army sergeant named Luke. Bennett had adopted him after leaving the service. Luke and Ranger had spent years working together. Most people joked that the dog understood English better than half the town. And usually Ranger was calm, steady, disciplined. The kind of dog children could climb on without worry. But not that afternoon. The moment Emma started walking toward the shelter door, Ranger stepped directly into her path. Emma giggled. The dog didn't move. She tried walking around him. He blocked her again. She frowned. Ranger, the dog, stared at her. Then he gave a low whine. Not aggressive, not playful. Concerned, Emma took another step. Ranger suddenly planted himself in front of the shelter entrance. His body became rigid. His ears stood forward, and then he barked. One sharp bark, Emma froze. The dog had never barked at her before. Across the yard, her grandmother looked over. "What is he doing?" Luke glanced up from loading supplies, probably nervous about the weather. But Ranger wasn't looking at the clouds. He wasn't looking at the road. He wasn't looking anywhere except the shelter. Emma tried approaching again. The dog physically pushed her backward with his chest. That got everyone's attention. "Hey!" Luke hurried over. "Ranger, down!" Normally, that command worked instantly. Not this time. The dog ignored him. A strange silence settled over the yard. Luke repeated the command. Again, Ranger refused. For the first time in years, the retired military dog disobeyed. Everyone exchanged confused looks. Then the weather siren sounded again, a louder warning. The nearest tornado had changed direction. The county emergency network urged residents to take shelter immediately. There wasn't time to argue with a stubborn dog. Luke grabbed Ranger's collar and pulled him aside. The dog resisted, not violently, but desperately, as if he knew something terrible would happen if they opened that door. The shelter entrance sat beneath a rusted metal hatch built decades earlier. Emma's grandfather had installed it after a deadly tornado struck the region in the 1970s. The shelter had protected the family for years. Nobody questioned its safety. Nobody had a reason to. Luke finally managed to move Ranger away. The dog began barking continuously. Emma had never heard him sound like that before. Neither had Luke. The hatch opened with a metallic groan. Cool air drifted upward. Luke climbed down first, then Emma's grandmother, then Emma. And the second Emma placed her foot on the top step, Ranger exploded into motion. The dog lunged, not toward Emma, toward the staircase. He squeezed past Luke, raced down 3 steps, then immediately backed out, whining, barking, refusing to enter. Luke grabbed him again. "What is wrong with you?" Ranger kept staring into the darkness below. Then something happened. Something small, something nobody else noticed, except Emma. She heard a sound, a faint creak. Deep below, almost like metal bending. The little girl tilted her head. "Grandma? What is it, sweetheart?" "I heard something." Her grandmother smiled nervously. "It's just the wind." But Emma wasn't convinced. Neither was Ranger. The dog kept barking. Then Emma saw something else. A crack. Tiny. Thin. Running along the concrete wall beside the staircase. She pointed. "What's that?" Everyone turned. Luke's expression changed immediately, because that crack hadn't been there before. Another creak echoed upward, louder this time. The sound of stress, pressure, movement. Luke's military instincts activated instantly. Everybody out. Nobody argued. The urgency in his voice erased every question. Emma's grandmother climbed out first. Emma followed. Luke emerged seconds later. The moment everyone reached the yard, Ranger stopped barking, as if his mission was complete. Then the ground shook. A deep rumble echoed beneath their feet. The old shelter entrance suddenly shifted several inches. Concrete cracked, metal twisted, and part of the ceiling collapsed inward. Everyone stared, speechless. If they had gone inside, they would have been trapped underground during a tornado warning. Maybe worse. Emma's grandmother covered her mouth. "Oh my God." Luke looked at Ranger. The dog stood silently beside him, watching, waiting, almost as if he had expected it. The tornado ultimately missed Red Creek that afternoon, but nobody forgot what happened. The story spread quickly. The retired military dog who refused to let a little girl enter a collapsing storm shelter. Local news stations covered it. Neighbors stopped by to see the damage. Everyone praised Ranger as a hero. The mystery should have ended there, except it didn't, because 2 days later, investigators arrived to determine why the shelter had failed, and what they found created far more questions than answers. The collapse wasn't caused by age alone. The concrete damage suggested something unusual beneath the structure, something hidden. County engineers requested excavation equipment. Luke assumed they were being overly cautious. Then the digging began. Within hours, workers uncovered evidence of an older foundation beneath the shelter. Nobody knew it existed. Town records showed nothing. Property maps showed nothing. The discovery puzzled everyone, especially Emma. She visited the site every afternoon, and every afternoon, Ranger sat beside the excavation area, watching, the same way he had watched the shelter. The same intense focus, the same concern. Luke started noticing it too. Whenever workers dug near one particular section, Ranger became alert. Whenever they moved away, he relaxed. At first, Luke dismissed it. Then Ranger started digging himself. One morning, workers arrived to discover a hole nearly 3 feet deep. The dog had spent hours clawing at a specific location overnight. Luke stared at the hole, then at Ranger. A strange feeling settled into his chest. Military working dogs weren't random. Years of training conditioned them to recognize things humans missed. Scents, materials, subtle changes, patterns, and Ranger clearly believed something was buried there. The excavation supervisor laughed when Luke mentioned it, but Emma didn't laugh. She crouched beside the dog. "What do you smell?" Ranger nudged the dirt. The little girl looked up. "What if he's trying to show us something?" Nobody answered. 3 days later, the workers uncovered a steel hatch. Not the storm shelter entrance. Another hatch. Older. Hidden beneath 6 feet of soil, the discovery stunned everyone. County records showed no structure beneath the property. No permits. No construction history, nothing. The hatch appeared decades old, corroded, forgotten, deliberately concealed. By evening, local officials arrived. The area was secured. Curiosity spread through town. Rumors multiplied. People speculated about bootleggers, Cold War bunkers, underground storage rooms, buried treasure. Emma listened to all of it, but she noticed something everyone else missed. The moment the hatch became visible, Ranger relaxed. For the first time in days, the dog stopped pacing, stopped digging, stopped staring, as though he had finally located exactly what he wanted people to find. The next morning, officials opened the hatch. The air that escaped smelled ancient, dusty, undisturbed. Flashlights illuminated a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Investigators entered carefully. When they emerged 40 minutes later, their faces looked strange. Confused, concerned. Nobody offered explanations, not immediately. But word eventually spread. The underground chamber wasn't a bunker. It wasn't storage, and it definitely wasn't treasure. It was an emergency shelter, built sometime during the late 1960s, a shelter nobody knew existed. Inside were old supplies, rusted cots, water containers, medical kits, and something else. Several locked filing cabinets. The contents of those cabinets changed everything, because the documents inside contained names, dozens of names, including people who still lived in Red Creek, including Emma's family, including Luke's family, and nobody understood why. The mystery suddenly became much larger than a collapsed shelter. Town historians became involved. County archives were searched. Newspapers were examined. Old residents were interviewed. The deeper people looked, the stranger the story became. Records from the early 1970s revealed a devastating tornado outbreak. One particularly destructive tornado had nearly erased Red Creek from the map. Several residents died. Many homes disappeared. But there was one detail buried within those records, a detail almost forgotten. During the storm, 3 children vanished. Not died. Vanished. Authorities searched for weeks. No trace. No explanation. The cases eventually went cold. Most people assumed the tornado carried them away. But the newly discovered files suggested something different. The names of the missing children appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. Emma's grandmother became pale when she saw them. Luke noticed immediately. "You know something?" She didn't answer at first. Then she quietly admitted a truth she had kept hidden for decades. One of the missing children had been her older brother, a boy named Samuel. Emma stared. "You had a brother?" Her grandmother nodded. Tears filled her eyes. Nobody in the family had ever discussed him. The loss had become too painful, too complicated, too unresolved. For 50 years, nobody knew what happened to Samuel Parker. Now his name had resurfaced inside a hidden underground shelter, and nobody understood why. The investigation intensified. Reporters arrived. State officials reviewed evidence. The contents of the filing cabinets suggested local authorities had conducted a secret search operation during the disaster. Yet no public record existed. No official reports. No explanation for why the documents had been hidden underground. Then came the first major twist. Investigators discovered several pages missing from the files. Not destroyed by time. Removed intentionally. Someone had taken them long ago. The missing pages corresponded precisely to the disappearance of Samuel Parker and the other children. That revelation transformed curiosity into suspicion. Suddenly, people wondered whether the children had truly vanished during the tornado at all. Maybe something else happened, something someone wanted forgotten. Emma became obsessed with the mystery. Every afternoon, she sat with Ranger while adults discussed theories. The dog always listened quietly, almost as though he understood. Then another discovery emerged, one that shocked the entire town. Among the documents was a photograph. The image showed several emergency workers standing outside the underground shelter shortly after the tornado. One man stood near the center, a volunteer firefighter. A respected local resident, a man remembered as a hero. His name was Walter Briggs. Walter had died years earlier. Most residents viewed him as a legend. There was only one problem. The date on the photograph was wrong. Walter had officially been reported injured, miles away at the exact time the picture was taken, meaning he couldn't have been there unless the records were false. Questions multiplied. Nobody liked where they led, especially Walter's surviving family. But evidence continued appearing. The second twist arrived less than a week later. Investigators discovered that Walter Briggs personally financed the construction of the hidden shelter. He never reported it, never documented it, never mentioned it publicly. Why would a respected volunteer firefighter secretly build an underground structure and hide records inside it? Nobody knew, until Emma accidentally uncovered a clue. While exploring family photo albums with her grandmother, she found an old newspaper clipping. Most people would have ignored it. Emma didn't. Children noticed details adults overlook. The article mentioned temporary shelters established during the 7th down tornado disaster. One shelter location had been crossed out by hand. Beside it appeared a handwritten note, "Not safe. Move children." Emma showed the clipping to Luke. His expression darkened because the handwriting matched notes discovered inside the hidden files. Someone had known a shelter wasn't safe. Someone moved children elsewhere, somewhere secret. Suddenly, the mystery shifted direction. Perhaps the children hadn't vanished during the tornado. Perhaps they had been relocated. If so, what happened afterward? The answer emerged from an unexpected source. Walter Briggs' granddaughter? A woman named Rachel. She contacted investigators after finding several boxes in her late grandfather's attic. Inside were journals, letters, maps, and a confession. Not a criminal confession, something far more heartbreaking. According to Walter's own writings, the original community shelter developed severe structural damage during the tornado emergency. Officials feared it would collapse. Children were moved quickly to a secondary underground location, the hidden shelter. Walter supervised the relocation. At first, everything went well. Then disaster struck. A second tornado altered course unexpectedly. Debris blocked both exits. The adults became separated from several children. Communication failed. Chaos erupted. Rescue teams believed everyone escaped, but records became confused. Names were misplaced. Witness accounts conflicted. In the aftermath, authorities made catastrophic assumptions. The missing children were declared tornado victims despite lacking evidence. Search efforts gradually ended. The truth remained buried, literally, for decades. Yet one question remained. If the children survived the shelter incident, what became of them? That's when investigators uncovered the third and most shocking twist of all. The children had been found years earlier, alive, just not under the names authorities expected. During the confusion following the tornado, several displaced families evacuated across state lines. Documentation errors occurred. Children were mistakenly identified. Temporary guardianship arrangements became permanent. Before anyone realized the mistakes, families had relocated. Lives moved forward. Records vanished into bureaucratic confusion. One by one, investigators traced the identities. All 3 missing children survived. All 3 grew up. All 3 lived full lives, and one of them was still alive. Samuel Parker, Emma's great-uncle, her grandmother's brother, 70 years old, living in New Mexico. Completely unaware his original family spent decades believing he died. The news shattered everyone. Emma's grandmother cried harder than anyone had ever seen. Half a century of grief suddenly transformed into possibility. Hope, fear, disbelief. Could it really be true? DNA testing confirmed it. Without question, without doubt. Samuel Parker was alive. The entire town followed the story. National media became interested, but Emma cared about only one thing: meeting him. Weeks later, Samuel arrived in Red Creek. The reunion felt impossible. A brother and sister separated by a tornado, separated by mistakes, separated by 50 years. Standing face to face again. Neither knew what to say initially. They simply hugged and cried and laughed and cried again. People watching openly wiped away tears. Emma stood nearby holding Ranger's leash. The old dog leaned gently against her leg, content, peaceful, as though his work was finished. But one final mystery remained. How had Ranger known? How did a retired military dog identify a hidden structure no human remembered existed? The answer came from specialists who reviewed his training history. Years earlier, Ranger served in disaster response missions, involving buried survivors and underground void detection. He learned to identify subtle scent patterns emerging through soil and damaged concrete. The collapse of the visible shelter likely released trapped airflow from the forgotten structure below. Ranger detected it immediately. The unusual scent, the underground cavity, the instability, everything. What appeared miraculous was actually the result of extraordinary training and instinct. Yet that explanation somehow made the story even more incredible. Because Ranger hadn't simply prevented Emma from entering a dangerous shelter. His actions triggered a chain of events that solved a 50-year-old mystery, recovered hidden records, reunited a family, and restored a piece of town history everyone thought was lost forever. Months passed. Life gradually returned to normal. A new storm shelter replaced the old one. Emma returned to school. The media attention faded, but some things never changed. Every year, the town held a community tornado preparedness event, and every year, one special guest received the loudest applause. An aging German shepherd named Ranger. Children lined up to pet him. Veterans shook Luke's hand. Families took photographs. The town eventually installed a memorial plaque near the new shelter. Not because Ranger saved the town, not because he solved a mystery, but because he reminded people of something important. Sometimes warnings come from places we don't expect. Sometimes the truth stays hidden longer than anyone imagines. And sometimes loyalty continues long after duty officially ends. Emma visited the plaque often, especially with Ranger. As the dog grew older, his muzzle turned gray. His steps became slower, his hearing faded. But whenever Emma sat beside him, he still looked at her exactly the same way. Protective, watchful, devoted. One evening, nearly a year after the discovery, Emma asked her grandmother a question. "Do you think Uncle Samuel would have ever come home if Ranger hadn't stopped me?" Her grandmother looked toward the sunset, toward the field stretching beyond Red Creek, toward the place where a buried secret slept for half a century. Then she smiled softly. No. Emma glanced at Ranger. The old dog rested quietly beside her, eyes half closed, breathing slowly. Content. Her grandmother reached down and scratched behind his ears. "I think he brought him home." The dog opened one eye briefly, as if he understood every word. Then he settled back down. And for the first time in 50 years, the Parker family felt complete. Not because a mystery had been solved, not because old records had been found, but because one retired military dog refused to ignore something that didn't feel right. And because of that decision, a little girl never entered a collapsing storm shelter. A lost brother came home, a grieving sister found peace, and an entire town learned that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four legs, sometimes they can't speak, and sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply standing in someone's path and refusing to move.